Welcome. This is the first mini lecture for Intermediate Macro, Chapter 1, The Science of Macroeconomics. I call it a mini lecture because I've been told by people I know and trust, who've been online teaching a lot longer than I have, that very long lecture videos don't get watched. And the best practice is to keep them short. So that's what I'm going to try to do. Things in the textbook that are really straightforward, you don't need me to go over those. I'll talk about the stuff that I want to highlight, the stuff that might be a little more difficult to pick up just by reading it, and extra bits that I think you might find interesting. So let's get started. These PowerPoints are uploaded to Moodle as PDFs. The version is slightly different. If I mark up one of these, you won't see that immediately reflected in Moodle. I'm still learning these controls, so I'm going to be a bit slow until I get used to them. We will survive. Okay. Macro. What is macroeconomics? Let's start with that. I am a microeconomist. That means that I study the behavior of individuals and very small groups, individual people, individual firms. But there are some things you can't study that way. For example, in a whole economy, well, there's an inflation rate, but individuals don't have inflation rates. So you can't study the individual behaviors and then just add them up to get the total economy. Some things are bigger than the sum of their parts. The unemployment rate, well, you may be employed or unemployed or not in the labor force or whatever, but that's not an unemployment rate. Individuals don't have monetary policies, for example, or international trade policies generally. Let's see. This is the unemployment rate over a whole bunch of years. Goes up and down. Why? The inflation rate goes up, goes down. Why? These are things you can't study at the individual level. Here is economic growth on a log scale. Let's see if I can write on this thing. Okay. You'll notice growth has been pretty consistent over the past couple hundred years in the United States. But there have been variations. Here, that's the Great Depression. This is coming out of the Great Depression, World War II and shortly thereafter. Now, why should you study macroeconomics? Well, this is why. These are pretty much all the countries of the world, color-coded by per capita income as of 2013. You can see United States, rich country, Canada, rich country, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, most of Western Europe, wealthy. But then you have countries in Africa, South Asia, East Asia, some in the Western Hemisphere, that are desperately poor. Here's a list. I think this is as of 2013. The average person in the Democratic Republic of the Congo had an annual income equivalent to $397. Malawi, $222. How do you survive on less than $1 a day?
Econ can be abstract. It can be kind of theoretical, but when you come right down to it, the fundamental question of economics is very real world. It's why are some people, some societies, some countries so desperately poor? This is important because that kind of poverty frequently is the difference between life and death. And if we don't understand why some countries are rich and some are poor, if we don't understand the cause of that difference, we're not going to be very successful at changing things. Adam Smith wrote an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. Frequently, we just call it The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. And he was one of the first to try to answer this question in a meaningful way. What are the causes of the wealth of nations? Why are some rich and poor? This is a classic book. It's been republished many, many, many times. Adam Smith's answer: little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. Let's see. Here, another great figure in macroeconomics, Milton Friedman, really created the field of monetary economics in the 1960s. Adam Smith's key insight was that both parties to an exchange can benefit as long as cooperation is voluntary. George Stigler, another Nobel Prize winner. Adam Smith tried to explain economic behavior by looking at the behavior of individuals acting in their own self-interest. There are other ideas than the ones that flow from originally Adam Smith. Here's one. Marxist economics. The theory of communism may be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property. This has been tried, not with great success, to put it mildly. Here's another originator of a school of economic thought, John Maynard Keynes. In the early 20th century, he wrote The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. That's one heck of a title. For the mid half of the 20th century, most Western economies, developed economies, followed what became known as Keynesian economics. Starting in the 70s, that fell out of favor, and monetary policy became considered more important. The reason why is that during the 1970s, a lot of economic things were happening that Keynes said were impossible. Another great economic thinker, F.A. Hayek, Friedrich Hayek. His most well-known book is The Road to Serfdom, although he wrote much more. His theories and Keynes's theories were in competition for much of the mid-20th century. Hayek took a more libertarian free market view of the way to create prosperity. Friedrich Hayek. I never met him. I wish I had. Some people, where I got my PhD at George Mason, some people there, faculty, actually did know him. Um, I'm jealous of that. Okay, next. How do we analyze whole economies? I'm an experimental economist. I study the behavior of individuals primarily by taking them, putting them in a lab, presenting them with economic choices, and watching what they do. I run experiments like a physicist or a chemist might. You can't do that in macroeconomics. You can't take Switzerland and Norway and randomize them into a control group and a treatment group and then come back in 100 years to see what happened. So we have to use models. Economists use models. A model is a simplified version of the world. It's simplified because it has to be. The world is too complicated to figure out. The human brain isn't up to it. But what we can do is make a very simple sort of play school version of the world that only models one little aspect of the world, like something in economics. And that little model can be so simple that a human brain can understand it. And we can play around with a model and see what it does and use that to help us understand the broader system that is being modeled. George Box, one of the greatest statisticians of the 20th century. I love this picture. He looks like such a happy guy. He said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. He's right. All models are wrong because they have to be. Wrong in that a model will not include all the complexity of the system that it's modeling. That's a feature, not a bug. If a model did not leave out big chunks of the stuff it's trying to model, then it would be as complicated as the thing you're trying to model, and it wouldn't be useful because you couldn't understand it. A model is only useful because it is, in a sense, incomplete, inaccurate. If it was a perfect model, the only perfect model of the universe is the universe. It's not very helpful. You still can't understand it. So, all models are wrong in that they leave out a lot of stuff, but some are useful. The reason why it's only some is because for a model to help you understand the system, it has to leave out a bunch of stuff so it's simple enough to understand, and it has to leave out the bits that are not really important to what you're trying to figure out. A model in chemistry explaining how molecules do stuff, that can safely leave out the color of the lab coats that the people are wearing, because that's not important to what you're trying to understand, how the molecules group together. If you leave out the stuff that you should leave out so that the model still includes the core bits you're interested in, then it'll be a useful model. If a model leaves out stuff that's really important to the thing you're trying to understand, then it's going to be incomplete and not useful. So, I find this amusing. Let's see. Just a moment. Can you see the mouse? Nope, you can't. Okay. Economics. This axis describes how often things happen. Never, all the time. This axis describes how accurately it can be described by an economic theory. Very well, not well at all. Here is micro. Micro describes very well things that will never happen. What that means is microeconomics, in describing individual behavior, frequently includes assumptions that are not true really in the real world. Like, everybody's perfectly selfish. Well, we know that's not really true. Macro, down here, it describes things that happen all the time. Economies grow, don't grow. Inflation goes up, inflation goes down. But macroeconomic models are notoriously bad at actually explaining things, at accurately predicting stuff. So it's a trade-off. Let's see. Here's an example of a model. Supply and demand. The simple supply and demand graph that you saw in your principles class. Like this. This is the quantity, this is the price, demand, supply. This model lets you predict that with this supply schedule, this demand schedule, the equilibrium price will be that, and the equilibrium quantity will be that. Very simple model. Demand for cars. It's a function of price and income. We generally use, for income in macro, we generally use Y as the variable name. We could have picked any other one, but in economics, that's what we do. So it's a function of the quantity demanded is a function of price and income. Very simple model. That could be the function describing that curve on the supply and demand graph, which would be there. You can create a function describing supply. In principles, you tend to do all of this with graphs. The more advanced you get in econ, the less you use graphs, and the more you use math and equations. What you see here, these two curves, this is actually a system of equations. Two equations and two unknowns. You can solve that and find the equilibrium, which would be there. Let's see. In a model, you're going to have endogenous variables and exogenous variables. What's the difference? An exogenous variable is one that is an input to the model. It's taken as a given. Endogenous variables are determined from within the model. Here's an example. In this, which you could also describe as f of y equals 2y, y is the exogenous variable. You can pick any number you want for y and plug it in. You pick y. This equation does not tell you what y is. That's something you provide. The endogenous variable, the one determined from within the model, is on the left-hand side. I give the function a value for y, which can be anything I want. Then the function spits out a value for x, or f of y. I don't get to pick what x is. The function does that because it's determined within this little simple model. So the exogenous variable is the one that you pick, or ones, plural, that you pick. Endogenous are the ones that the model spits out. Here, in the supply and demand model, you tell the model what the what does PS stand for? Oh, price of supply. What that is, you tell the model what income is. Then the model will tell you the quantity supplied, quantity demanded, and the price. Basically where the equilibrium is. Oh, let's see. There are many models. In macro, there is no one model that's going to describe everything. And the models frequently give us contradictory results. So we have to use many models, each model compensating for the weaknesses of the other to more generally understand how entire economies work. Now, the models that we're going to study this semester, one of the core differences, maybe of the mainstream models, really the core difference. There are all sorts of bells and whistles in this one that aren't in that one and whatever. But the core difference is this. Does the model assume, or to what degree does the model assume prices are flexible or sticky? Going back here, supply and demand. What you learned in the principles was, well, here, if you start at D1, with the D1 and S, the equilibrium is there. If demand shifts to D2, then the equilibrium will now be there. But this assumes, and the price will go up from P1 to P2, this assumes the prices can change. This is, we call it comparative statics. You're studying one equilibrium and then the other equilibrium, but you're ignoring how this system gets from A to B. Can prices change at all? Prices don't change instantly, we know that. I mean, a billionth of a second later, prices haven't changed. So how fast prices can change, how sluggish they are in changing, to what degree they can change over any reasonable period of time. That, depending on how you answer that, you can make profound differences in the predictions these models make. Really broadly, Keynesian economics, and we'll get to this, is predicated on the assumption that prices are very sticky, that when economic circumstances change, prices change very slowly. And that's associated, I hate to bring politics into econ, but it's unavoidable at times. That's associated more with the political left. More free market economic theories, generally preferred by the political right, tend to assume that prices are more flexible. They're less sticky. We use the term sticky. That when economic circumstances change, prices adjust pretty quick. We will get into all of the details of how those two different assumptions make the models predict very different things. This is roughly what we're going to study. Classical theory, where we assume prices are flexible. Growth theory, where we assume, and business cycle theory, where we assume that prices don't change so easily. And that is pretty much what you need to focus on for the first chapter. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.